Welcome to the Published and Paid podcast, where we share book, business, leadership, and life lessons in 20 minutes or less to help you build a thought leadership brand and business. My name is Jasmine Womack. I'm a former middle school language arts teacher turned seven-figure entrepreneur, and I am glad that you are here. Let's get started. Welcome back to another wonderful episode of the Published and Paid podcast, where we discuss all things publishing your intellectual property through thought leadership books, through publishing courses, coaching programs, curriculums, and getting paid for it. We also discuss leadership, business, and life lessons. And today's topic on this podcast is overcoming other people's opinions. Now, while you might feel like this is not an immediate challenge that you may personally have, over my work with leaders over the past decade, I have personally experienced through working with clients and coaching others that leaders tend to shine brightly when they are in environments in which they feel comfortable, in environments in which they feel known, in environments in which they are well aware of. However, when it comes to building a business centered around your thought leadership, centered around your books, your courses, your coaching programs, your ideas, your methodologies, I find that many leaders and experts have no problem with the creating and the developing of the content. But when it comes to the actual promoting, the marketing, the being seen, the coming from behind the scenes and coming up front and putting yourself out there, I've noticed that there always seems to be some type of blockage or hindrance. When I was in the building stages of my business, I knew that I would not sell books. I knew that I would not sell courses. I would not have success of any kind. I would not have the success that I desired if I didn't promote, if I was not willing to allow myself to be seen. I understood back then that my book was part of my personal brand, that my books were part of my personal brand, and that as the face of the brand, I needed to talk about what I was doing and promote. Fast forward to now, I don't necessarily have an apprehension about being public because I've done it so much. However, I have apprehensions when I feel like I'm hitting a mental roadblock or other things, like when I feel like my braids need to be redone, right? Things like that. I'm like, oh, I'm not going on camera until I get my hair done, but that's a simple fix, right? But when I first started, I was terrified of video. And it wasn't that I was terrified of shooting the video. I did that in my career. That was the easy part. I was actually terrified of people from all over the world seeing me. I was afraid of being known. I was afraid of losing what I felt was my control of my privacy. And I had apprehensions as well about my speaking. And I talked about this in my second book. I had apprehensions about speaking publicly because I had been teased when I was in high school. Oh, and throughout other periods of my life, I had been teased and made fun of for talking slowly, for having a Southern drawl, and for speaking loud. Like my mom would always tell me this story about my preschool teacher who thought I had hearing problems because, according to her, I talked extremely loud. And I talked so loud that she felt like I was yelling, and she would ask my mom if I had hearing problems. And this was something that has stayed with me throughout my life. Like when I was teaching, my voice would carry. So I wasn't actually trying to yell. It's just that my voice would naturally project. And that was something that I had that it just was since I was like 2 or 3 years old, 4 years old. It wasn't anything that I tried to do. It just really was. It just was a part of who I am. And so even now at 40, I have to do my best to be aware of my volume because my voice carries, even though I don't intend for it to carry. Even if I feel like I'm talking quietly or talking slow, to others, I'm still talking very loud. However, despite my own self consciousness and my limiting beliefs, I made a commitment to use my voice to positively impact people all over the globe. And I began to feel like if my voice is loud, it must be meant to be heard. I started focusing on the pros and I started focusing on why I needed to lean into leveraging my voice to share a positive message, a message of transformation, a message of change, a message of elevation, as opposed to being the behind the scenes and being cool with being quiet and not being heard. And because I leaned into the thing that I feared, the results have been astounding. And so in this episode, my goal is to empower you to value yourself, to value your imperfections, to tap into your mission, your purpose, and your beliefs instead of other people's judgments. I think that one of the reasons that we tend to care so much about other people's opinions, I think that there are several reasons. And one of those reasons can be attributed to biological and societal factors. For example, being ingrained about staying in a quote unquote woman's place. Women used to being seen and not heard. Women used to being eye candy, you know, being on a man's arm and looking good and making him look good. But once you're opinionated, then you're viewed as argumentative. Or once you have an opinion about something, then you're being called disagreeable or difficult. And those same attributes in men can be, referred to as being confident, can be referred to as being articulate. So the same attributes that men would have that may come across as being positive, when a woman has similar attributes, then it can be viewed as a negative by our male counterparts. And this is no slight to the men listening to this. We know what historically expectations of women, not just in the United States, but around the world are. Okay. So biological and societal factors definitely have something to do with it. I also believe that negative experiences during certain times in our lives, people saying certain things to you, being made to feel ashamed if you ask questions or if you questioned people in authority. And then sometimes there was just plain old fear, things that we can't necessarily pinpoint the reasoning behind. We just know that for whatever reason, it's something that makes us uncomfortable and we're not very fond of it. What I found is that when you give in to these antiquated, outdated belief systems, it can have a negative impact on your mental health, your self-esteem, and even in the decisions that you make because you know that you are not living up to your fullest potential. But at some point along the lines, when you are committing yourself to building a personal brand, there comes a time in which you have to determine which one's more important. Is it more important to value someone else's opinion over your own? Or is it more important for you to be confident and put yourself out there despite your apprehensions and despite your fears? Some of the things that you can actually do to navigate this space of being afraid to put yourself out there. And I'm talking about this because I've met people that are afraid to put out content. They're afraid to go live. Amazing, brilliant experts. But the very thought of being seen creates anxiety. And at some point, we have to sit down and we have to think about it and we have to ask ourselves, what about this is crippling me? What about doing this is crippling my progress and crippling my ability to catapult my results and quadruple the transformation and the change that I can make in the world? So this is where you may want to incorporate some self-awareness practices, such as journaling and asking yourself questions. Asking questions to the questions, or or better yet, asking questions to the answers. So I learned a long time ago, when you ask, you have to ask why 3 to 5 times to really get to the root of what's really going on. So if you ask yourself, for example, what is it about this that is scaring me? I don't know, can't be an answer. Give yourself an answer, write it down, and then ask, but why? Write the response to that and then ask, but why? For every answer that you give yourself, ask why. And you want to ask why 3 to 5 layers deep. And that's when you will get to the actual answer. But you have to be willing to be honest with yourself, and you have to be willing to truly engage in this self-reflective process. If you're not willing to do that, then I definitely would suggest that you go and get professional help through professional counseling. Okay. Now, when you want to lean more into yourself and embrace your power, here are a few strategies that you can begin to implement. Understand your values. What are your personal values, and what are your values when it comes to your business? You have to identify what truly matters to you. Because what matters to you, your values, that's what is going to drive your decisions. That is what is going to drive your actions or inaction. So if other people's approval is a core value of yours, then that means that you're not going to want to stand out there on your own 2 feet and be willing to go against the status quo and be willing to share your truth unless it's approved by other people. And when you step into that space, you're truly giving someone else not just control over you, but control over your future. And at that point, you're no longer living in your calling. You also have to build your own self-efficacy. This is your belief in yourself. You've got to become more confident in what it is you do. And what I found is that confidence is built in the doing. Confidence is built in the accomplishment and the attainment of what we call small wins. So you have to do a little bit to get a win. And when you get a win, that's going to build your confidence in yourself. So what this means is that instead of stepping back and saying, okay, I'm too scared to do this, I'm not going to do this. This means that if you were in, say, a coaching community like my community, Author Made Easy Bootcamp, we allow our clients to go live in the group to get practice. That is a small win. Although it may not have been public, right? You are able to practice within a safe space and get feedback and get the feel of it before you go public. So that's a small win, because if you went from not doing anything at all to now you're taking a step closer, that is a win. And continuing to do those types of things is going to build your confidence. You also have to differentiate between helpful critique and harmful opinions. So, yes, when you are in a community or when you've hired a coach, your coach may give you some feedback so that you can grow and develop and improve. Whereas some folks are just plain old hating. And they're not hating because they don't like what you're doing. Typically, when people hate, they hate either usually because they have too much time on their hands and they aren't doing anything productive. And in many cases, They're watching you and wishing that they had the courage that you have. And instead of tapping into their own power, they're trying to dim the light on yours. You have to have laser focus, laser vision, and you have to block out the noise. You also have to limit your exposure to judgmental people and limit your exposure to social media platforms that foster comparison. So if you're watching someone else and you're comparing yourself to them, you're comparing your step 1 to their step 20, and because what they produce looks extremely crisp, clean, and professional, and you feel like yours isn't holding a match, then you need to mute them. Anyone whose voice, whose content is overtaking your own voice or making you second guess or question yourself, you need to mute them. Muting them doesn't mean that you unfollow them. You might choose to still follow them. But when you mute them, it means that their content will no longer come up in your feed. It will no longer be there to distract you. Okay. And of course, you're going to need a support system. You've got to surround yourself with supportive people. The supportive people might not be your best friends. The supportive people might not be your family. It might not be your spouse. This is why getting in coaching communities where others are doing the same is so beneficial, because now you have a community of people who knows what it feels like, and they can relate to you, and they can be there to support you. So it's not enough just to get in any coaching program or hire any coach. You want to make sure that you hire someone that has the exact skill set to help you, and that you upon joining their program or their mentorship, then your community is going to be comprised of others who either have done what you're doing or who are working and going in that same direction. Part of overcoming other people's opinions is that you're going to have to develop the confidence, the mental strength, and the resilience against negative opinions, because other people's opinions are not going anywhere. They're going to be there. You just have to block out the noise and not pay attention to it. And you have to constantly and consistently find ways to revalidate yourself to yourself, and make sure that you're staying on top of your own growth, both personally and professionally. Listen, you have what it takes to do this. You have a message that people all around the world need to hear. And it's time for you to step forward and deliver it confidently, competently. I would love to hear more about what you're doing to overcome other people's opinions as you're building your personal brand. So feel free to reach out to me on Instagram, on LinkedIn. I can be found on Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube at the Jasmine Womack. And you can also email in at hello@jasminewomack.com and let us know, what you're doing actively to overcome other people's opinions. And so I thank you for tuning in. Again, you can find me and connect with me on Instagram, YouTube, and LinkedIn at the Jasmine, Jasmine, Womack, Womack. And if you are ready to fully step into your power, I invite you to join me and the team at Published and Paid Live 2024, the finale. Published and Paid Live is the premier 2-day live event for experts ready to transform their $1 million message into a best-selling book and high-ticket coaching program. You can get all the details and reserve your spot at www.publishedandpaidlive.com. Until next time, peace, love, and impact.